They say, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." But that old saying is incomplete. It is tragically naive. The truth is far more terrifying. The most calculated, the most devastating, and the most patient fury does not belong to a woman who was merely scorned. It belongs to a woman who was underestimated. It belongs to the one who watched in silence, listened through the walls of deceit, and meticulously collected every shard of a shattered trust, not to mend it, but to forge it into a weapon. Tonight, that weapon was aimed at the heart of the Crawford family anniversary party. From her position near the grand ballroom's French doors, Amelia Hayes Crawford looked like a portrait of high society elegance. Her gown shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, and a glass of champagne rested delicately in her hand. But if one looked closely, they would see the faint tremor in her fingers, a grip just a little too tight on the fragile stem. Her heart was not pounding with fear, but with the steady, rhythmic beat of a clock counting down to 0. Across the room, her husband, Richard, handsome and utterly oblivious, laughed with a business associate. Beside him stood his mother, Eleanor, the family matriarch, draped in diamonds and self-satisfaction. They were the king and queen of this opulent charade, smiling and preening for their court, completely unaware that their castle was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. To the 100 guests mingling in the room, this was a celebration of a decade of love, a testament to a perfect marriage. To Amelia, it was a stage, meticulously set for the final act of a very long play. She knew every lie that had been told, every secret whispered, every venomous plot hatched in the shadows of this very house. She could feel the weight of the evidence she held, a silent, crushing force waiting to be unleashed. For months, she had played the part of the fragile, fraying wife, letting them believe their psychological warfare was working. She had absorbed their gaslighting, their condescending remarks, their feigned concern, all while a storm of cold, hard resolve gathered within her. Now, the storm was ready to break. The carefully constructed symphony of their deceit was about to reach its final, crashing crescendo. And as she watched them, basking in the glow of their imminent destruction, Amelia felt the last vestiges of the woman she used to be slip away, replaced by the quiet, unblinking focus of a hunter who knows, without a doubt, that her prey has finally walked into the trap. Before the storm, there was the calm. But it was not a peaceful calm. It was an artificial one, the kind of stillness found in a museum exhibit, beautiful to behold, but cold and without life. This was the world of Amelia and Richard Crawford, a carefully curated masterpiece of domestic bliss housed within a sprawling colonial mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. The lawns were manicured to an impossible green, the white hydrangeas bloomed in disciplined clusters, and the sun always seemed to hit the polished brass of the front door just right. It was a picture of perfection, and like any picture, it was a two-dimensional illusion. The architect of this illusion was not Amelia, despite her profession, but her mother-in-law, Eleanor Crawford. Amelia Hayes had never been a part of such a world. She grew up in a modest suburban home, where the floors creaked and the furniture told stories of generations. Her father was a high school history teacher, and her mother a librarian, and they had gifted her something the Crawfords could never buy: a belief in the power of her own mind. Amelia was brilliant. She saw the world in lines, angles, and structures. She could look at an empty plot of land and see not just a building, but a home, a sanctuary, a space that would breathe with the lives of the people inside it. She built her own architectural firm from the ground up, fueled by late nights, relentless passion, and a talent that was undeniable. She was a creator, a builder of things that were meant to last. And when she met Richard Crawford at a charity gala, she believed she had found the man to build a life with, a foundation of love as solid as any she could design. Richard was everything her world was not. He was the sole heir to the Crawford fortune, an empire built on old money and older connections. He possessed an easy charm that seemed to steamroll any obstacle, a smile that could disarm criticism, and the handsome, athletic build of a man who had never known a day of real struggle. In the early days of their romance, Amelia saw his life not as a mark of entitlement, but as one of stability. She fell in love with his grand gestures, his seemingly endless optimism, and the way he made her feel like the center of his universe. He was proud of her career, or so he said, calling her his genius architect. He was her rock, her partner. It was only after the wedding, after the ink on the marriage certificate was dry and they had moved into the Greenwich house his parents had gifted them, that she realized Richard was not the foundation of their life. He was merely another, albeit beautiful, fixture within a structure that had been designed and was wholly owned by his mother. Eleanor Crawford was a woman forged from pressure and privilege. She moved through the world with the serene confidence of someone who had never been told no. Her approval was the currency of the family, and she distributed it sparingly. From the moment Richard introduced Amelia, Eleanor had viewed her not as a future daughter, but as a project, a variable to be managed. She appraised Amelia's middle-class background with a polite, dismissive smile, as if it were a quaint but ultimately curable affliction. Her compliments were always double-edged swords. "That dress is quite striking, Amelia. So bold for someone with your background," she might say, her voice a silken whisper. Or, "It's wonderful how you've built your own little company." Richard, of course, never had to. Her influence was insidious, seeping into every corner of their marriage. Amelia had designed a vision for their home, a blend of modern comfort and classic elegance. She returned from a week-long business trip to find the living room completely redecorated in heavy, ornate furniture, dark brocades, and imposing oil paintings of Crawford ancestors. "A surprise, darling," Eleanor had chirped, standing proudly in the center of the room. The house needed to reflect its heritage. When Amelia looked at Richard, stunned and hurt, he just smiled his placating smile. "It's a bit much, but Mother means well. Let's live with it for a while," he'd said, kissing her forehead, effectively ending the discussion. The subject was never brought up again. Then came their son, Leo, a bright, beautiful boy who became the absolute center of Amelia's world, but he also became a new battleground. Eleanor questioned everything. Amelia's decision to continue working. Her choice of a progressive preschool over the traditional academy Crawford men had attended for generations. Even the organic meals she prepared for him. Her criticisms were always phrased as gentle concerns. "Are you sure you have the time for that big project, Amelia? Leo needs his mother at this age." And Richard, as always, would act as the mediator who always tilted the scales in one direction. "She's just from a different generation, honey," he would reason, after Eleanor had left. "But she has a point about the academy. Connections are important. My mother just wants what's best for us." That phrase became his mantra, the shield he used to deflect any criticism of Eleanor, the justification for his own passivity. "She just wants what's best for us." Amelia, the builder, the woman who understood the critical importance of a solid foundation, began to inspect her own. She saw that it was riddled with cracks. She had not married a man, she had married into a system, a dynasty where she would always be the outsider. Her love for Richard was real, and she believed his was too, but it was a love entangled and suffocated by the ivy of his maternal devotion. She poured more of herself into her work, finding solace and control in her blueprints and designs. Her office became her sanctuary. Her company flourished, earning accolades and attracting high-profile clients. She was Amelia Hayes, the celebrated architect. But at home, she was just Amelia Crawford, the woman who wasn't quite good enough. She told herself it was a compromise, a price to pay for the beautiful son they shared and the moments of genuine happiness that still surfaced from time to time. She chose to believe in the perfect picture because admitting the truth was too painful, that she, an expert in structure and design, had built her life inside a gilded cage. And the person holding the key was not her husband, but his mother. The turning point, the moment a hairline crack splinters into a catastrophic fracture, rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as just another Tuesday. For Amelia, it arrived in the form of an email with the subject line, "Project Athena, we've got it." Project Athena was not just another contract, it was a career-defining commission to design the new Center for Performing Arts, a building that would reshape the city's skyline. It was the kind of project architects spend their entire lives dreaming about. For a week, Amelia and her team had barely slept, refining every detail of their proposal. And they had won. They had beaten out 3 of the largest, most established firms in the country. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over her, so potent it left her breathless. This was hers. She had built it, earned it, and no one could ever take it away from her. That evening, she planned a celebratory dinner. She wanted to share this monumental victory with the 2 people who were supposed to be her biggest supporters, her husband and his mother. She booked a table at their favorite restaurant, the kind of place with white tablecloths and hushed conversations. When she announced the news, Richard's face lit up with what looked like genuine pride. He raised his glass. "To my brilliant wife. I always knew you were a star." Amelia's heart swelled. For a moment, the tension and unspoken resentments of the past few years seemed to melt away. Then, Eleanor spoke. She lifted her own glass, her smile as thin as the crystal rim. "Well, isn't that something?" she said, her tone perfectly pleasant. "Congratulations, Amelia. I do hope you'll find time to manage it all. A project of that magnitude must be incredibly demanding. We wouldn't want Leo to feel neglected." And just like that, the chill returned to the air. The comment was a masterclass in Eleanor's particular brand of poison, a compliment wrapped around a threat, a celebration laced with judgment. Richard's smile faltered slightly. He looked from his mother to his wife, his usual instinct to placate kicking in. "Of course she can manage it, Mother. Amelia is incredible." But the damage was done. The joy of Amelia's achievement had been tainted, subtly reframed as a potential dereliction of her maternal duty. The rest of the dinner was strained. The conversation shifted to Richard's latest golf game and Eleanor's charity committee, subjects that were safe, familiar, and firmly within the Crawford sphere of importance. Amelia's triumph was neatly put back in its box, filed away as a minor and slightly troublesome footnote to the family's ongoing narrative. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. Richard, spurred on by his mother's constant concerns, began to watch Amelia with a new, critical eye. "You seem tired, honey. Are you sure you're not taking on too much?" he'd ask, echoing Eleanor's words. "Chloe had to take Leo to the park by herself again today. He misses you." Every late night Amelia spent at the studio, a necessity for a project of this scale, was met not with support, but with a sigh of weary disappointment from her husband. They were small things, tiny cuts, but they were beginning to bleed her dry. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, the isolation of a person whose success is viewed not as a shared victory, but as a personal betrayal. The discovery came on a Thursday night. Amelia was working late in her home office, reviewing blueprints. She had been so engrossed that she hadn't realized Richard had come home and gone to his study down the hall. Around midnight, she got up to get a glass of water. As she passed his study, she saw the door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting through the darkened hallway. She heard his voice, low and tense, and she paused, a vague sense of unease stopping her in her tracks. She could only hear his side of the conversation at first. "I know, Mother. I know, but it feels extreme. She is a good mother." A pang of guilt hit Amelia for eavesdropping, but his words held her captive. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. Richard fell silent, listening to the voice on the other end of the line. Amelia could not hear the words, but she could imagine the tone cold, persuasive, relentless. Then Richard spoke again, his voice weaker now, stripped of its earlier protest. "But how would we even do that? How do you prove something like that?" He paused again, listening. Then he said, "A nanny? To watch her? To document things?" Amelia's blood ran cold. A nanny? Why would they need a nanny to watch her? Her mind raced, unable to grasp the shape of what she was hearing. And then, Eleanor's voice, tinny and sharp through the phone's receiver, became just loud enough for Amelia to hear one, perfectly clear, bone-chilling sentence. "It's not about watching her, Richard. It's about creating the situation. We have to act now, before her new success makes her untouchable. You must prove she is an unfit mother. It's the only way you will gain full control of the assets, and more importantly, the boy, when you file for divorce." The world stopped. The blueprints in Amelia's hand slipped, their rustle deafening in the silence. She slapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp, her body frozen in the hallway. Unfit mother. Assets. The boy. Divorce. The words were not just words, they were hammers, shattering the entire foundation of her life. Every strange comment from Eleanor, every sigh from Richard, every manufactured guilt trip, it wasn't just marital strife, it was a campaign. A deliberate, calculated plot to dismantle her life, to take her child, and to steal her fortune. The betrayal was so monstrous, so absolute, that for a moment she thought she might be dreaming. This couldn't be her Richard, the man she loved, the father of her child. But the sick feeling in the pit of her stomach, the cold dread spreading through her veins, was terrifyingly real. She didn't know how long she stood there, paralyzed by the sheer evil of it all. Slowly, mechanically, she backed away from the door, her movements silent and robotic. She crept back up the stairs, each step a monumental effort. She slipped into their bed, lying on her side, facing away from the door. She stared into the darkness, her eyes wide open, replaying the words over and over again. When Richard came into the room an hour later, she felt the bed dip with his weight. He sighed, settling in beside her, completely unaware that the woman lying next to him was no longer his wife, but a stranger. The love, the trust, the life she thought they had built, it had all been a lie. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. But as the hours of darkness ticked by, something else began to stir beneath the agony. It was a tiny, cold spark. A spark of rage. And in that moment, Amelia knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had started a war, and she would be the one to finish it. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, a performance that deserved an award Amelia never wanted. She moved through her life as if nothing had changed, a ghost haunting the shell of her former self. She made breakfast for Leo, her smiles genuine only when directed at him. She kissed Richard goodbye in the morning, the touch of her lips on his cheek feeling like a lie, a betrayal of the rage that now lived inside her. She discussed Project Athena with her team, her focus a shield against the emotional chaos that threatened to consume her. Every interaction was a carefully rehearsed scene. Outwardly, she was Amelia Crawford, successful architect, wife, and mother. Inwardly, she was a strategist in a silent war, her mind a fortress where she meticulously analyzed the enemy and planned her campaign. Her first instinct, the raw, human desire to scream, to confront, to hurl the ugly truth at Richard and his mother like a grenade, was quickly suppressed. She played the scenario out in her head, the architect in her mapping every possible outcome. Confrontation would lead to denial. They would call her hysterical, paranoid, unstable. They would turn her own righteous anger against her, using it as the first piece of evidence that she was becoming unhinged. They would simply become more careful, their plotting more subtle, making it impossible for her to ever prove what she knew. Fleeing with Leo was equally untenable. They would unleash the full power of the Crawford legal machine, painting her as an abductor, a mother who had snapped under the pressure of her career. They would use their money and influence to crush her, and they would win. The legal system, she knew, was a blunt instrument, and without irrefutable proof, her story was just that, a story. A he said, she said, battle she was destined to lose. The realization settled upon her with the cold, hard weight of granite. She could not react. She had to act. Her pain, a white-hot agony that threatened to incinerate her from the inside out, had to be channeled. Heartbreak was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had to let it cool, to let it harden into something useful, something sharp. She was a builder. She knew that before you can construct something new and strong, you must first survey the compromised site and plan a controlled demolition. Her marriage was that site, and Richard and Eleanor were the toxic rot in its foundation. The only way to save herself and her son was not to run from the condemned structure, but to bring it down on her own terms, ensuring the culprits were trapped inside when it fell. Her true work began at night. After Leo was asleep and Richard was snoring softly beside her, a sound that now grated on her nerves like grinding stone, Amelia would slip out of bed and descend into her office. She swapped her architectural software for encrypted browsers and secure search engines. Her queries were no longer about building codes and material stress points, but about corporate intelligence, private investigation firms, and counter-surveillance specialists. She sifted through dozens of firms, dismissing the ones that specialized in simple infidelity cases. She didn't need a man in a trench coat with a long-lens camera. She needed a ghost, a weapon, a specialist in infiltration and psychological warfare. After 3 nights of exhaustive research, she found it. The Argent Group. Their website was minimalist and discreet, their client list confidential, but their reputation, whispered about in the highest echelons of corporate and legal circles, was legendary. They were not cheap. They were the best. A week later, Amelia walked into a nondescript office building in Midtown Manhattan. The Argent Group's headquarters had no name on the door, only a suite number. The interior was sleek, modern, and as silent as a tomb. She was led into a conference room with a single glass table by a woman who introduced herself as Miss Sterling, the group's director. Sterling was in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through Amelia's carefully constructed composure. There was no preamble, no small talk. "Tell me what you need, Mrs. Crawford," she said, her voice calm and direct. Amelia took a deep breath and laid out the entire story, from her marriage to Eleanor's control, to her career success, and finally, to the conversation she had overheard. She spoke without emotion, her voice steady, presenting the facts as if she were briefing a client on a difficult project. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated her problem and her objective. "They plan to use a nanny to fabricate evidence that I am an unfit mother," Amelia concluded. "I don't want to stop them. I want to help them." Miss Sterling listened intently, her expression unreadable. When Amelia was finished, the director was silent for a long moment. "Most people in your position come to us for defense," she said finally. "You are asking for a weapon." "I'm an architect," Amelia replied, her voice cold as steel. "I believe the best defense is a superior design." A flicker of something respect perhaps crossed Miss Sterling's face. She nodded slowly. "This is a high-risk operation. It requires a very specific skill set. Not just surveillance, but performance. We have one operative who is uniquely suited for this kind of work." She pressed a button on an intercom. "Send in Vance." The woman who entered the room was not what Amelia expected. She was younger, perhaps in her early 30s, with a face that was pleasant and immediately forgettable. She could be anyone: a barista, a student, a tourist. She introduced herself as Clara Vance, but when she looked at Amelia, her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and incredibly perceptive. Miss Sterling explained the situation. As Clara listened, she did not take notes. She simply watched Amelia, absorbing every detail. When the briefing was over, Clara spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but confident. "They'll be looking for someone they can control. Someone pretty, but not intimidating. Competent, but with a hint of naivete. They'll want a blank canvas they think they can paint on." And so, the 3 women began to create a person. They named her Chloe Sullivan. They built her a backstory. A girl from a small town in the Midwest, with a degree in early childhood education from a state school. They gave her a fabricated resume, glowing references from families that didn't exist, and a social media profile that was just active enough to be believable, filled with innocuous posts about baking and hiking. They decided Chloe should seem slightly starstruck by the Crawfords' wealth, making her appear susceptible to manipulation through money or promises of a grander life. They designed her wardrobe, her mannerisms, even the way she would nervously tuck her hair behind her ear when speaking to Eleanor. They were not just hiring an investigator, they were casting the lead role in a tragedy of Richard and Eleanor's own making. When Amelia left the Argent Group's office that afternoon, the city air felt different. The crushing weight of her husband's betrayal was still there, a permanent ache in her soul. But it was no longer the only thing she felt. A new sensation was layered over it, a feeling of empowerment, of taking back control. She was no longer a victim waiting for the axe to fall. She was the architect of a grand, intricate trap. The board was set. The pieces were in place. All she had to do now was wait for her opponents to make their move. The play was about to begin. The first move of their game was played as Amelia had predicted, on a chessboard of expensive linen and fine china. It was during a Sunday brunch, a weekly ritual Eleanor insisted upon, that the matriarch placed her poisoned pawn on the board. With Richard and Leo present, Eleanor fixed Amelia with a look of profound, theatrical concern. "Amelia, my dear," she began, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. "Richard and I have been so worried about you. This new project, while a tremendous accomplishment, is clearly taking a toll. You look exhausted." Amelia, who had deliberately worn less makeup and a tired expression, simply stirred her coffee. "I'm fine, Eleanor. Just busy." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, a diamond bracelet glittering on her wrist. "Nonsense. A woman can't be expected to run a major company and a household single-handedly. It's not natural. You need proper help. A full-time, live-in nanny for Leo." Amelia feigned resistance, just as she and Clara had rehearsed. "I don't think that's necessary. I have a schedule that works." "A schedule?" Eleanor scoffed lightly. "Darling, this isn't about schedules. It's about providing Leo with stability while his mother island, preoccupied." "Richard, don't you agree?" Richard, ever the loyal soldier, immediately nodded. "Mother's right, honey. It would take a lot of pressure off you. We can afford the best. It just makes sense." Amelia let out a weary sigh, a carefully calibrated performance of defeat. "Fine," she said, looking down at her plate. "If you both think it's for the best, I'll consider it." Eleanor smiled, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes. The bait had been taken. 2 weeks later, the trap was ready to be sprung. Eleanor called Amelia, her voice buzzing with excitement. Through a trusted friend, she had found the most perfect candidate, a young woman with a flawless resume and a heart of gold. She had already taken the liberty of doing a preliminary screening and had arranged for the girl to come to the house for an interview that Saturday. "Her name is Chloe Sullivan," Eleanor announced, "and I have a very good feeling about her." Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, a mixture of dread and exhilaration. The Trojan horse was at the gates. Chloe Sullivan arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. She was the physical embodiment of the character they had designed, pretty in a wholesome, girl-next-door way, dressed in a simple floral dress and sensible flats. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she clutched a leather portfolio to her chest with both hands. She looked completely, utterly out of place in the cavernous, marble-floored foyer of the Crawford mansion, and her wide-eyed, slightly nervous demeanor was perfect. Clara Vance was gone. Chloe Sullivan had taken her place. The interview was held in the formal living room, the very room Eleanor had redecorated. It felt like a royal court. Eleanor sat in the center of a brocade sofa, positioning herself as the queen. Richard sat beside her, looking relaxed and charming. Amelia chose an armchair slightly to the side, assuming the role of the skeptical, protective mother. "So, Chloe," Eleanor began, her voice smooth and imperious, "your resume is quite impressive. Tell us why you believe you're the right fit for the Crawford family." Clara, as Chloe, gave a small, nervous smile that was achingly convincing. "Well, Mrs. Crawford," she began, her voice soft, "I've always believed that being a nanny is more than a job. It's about becoming part of a family. I admire families with strong values and traditions. My goal is to provide a stable, loving environment for the child and to support the parents in any way I can." The answer was brilliant in its ambiguity. To a neutral party, it sounded professional. To Eleanor, the words, "strong values and support the parents in any way I can," translated to, "I am obedient and will follow your orders." Richard leaned forward, smiling. "And what do you like to do for fun, Chloe? Do you have any hobbies?" Chloe blushed slightly, a masterful touch. "Oh, nothing too exciting, Mr. Crawford. I like to bake, and I enjoy hiking. I'm pretty quiet, really. I mostly just love reading and spending time with children." She sounded simple, harmless, and utterly pliable. Amelia knew it was her turn to test the performance. She hardened her expression. "Leo is a very active, very bright boy. He can be a handful. How do you handle discipline when a child is acting out?" Chloe met her gaze directly, her expression earnest. I believe in clear boundaries and positive reinforcement, Mrs. Crawford. But most importantly, I believe in following the parents' lead. Every house has its own rules, and my job is to uphold them consistently. The parents' philosophy is always the one that matters. She had passed the test with flying colors, assuring Amelia of her professionalism while assuring Eleanor of her deference. The interview continued for another hour. Eleanor asked probing questions about her background, her family, her future ambitions. Chloe answered each one with the perfect blend of honesty and vulnerability they had crafted. She was an open book, but every page had been written by the Argent Group. The final, brilliant stroke came near the end. As Chloe was gathering her things, she accidentally let her portfolio slip, spilling its contents onto the floor. As she scrambled to pick up the papers, flustered and apologizing profusely, Richard and Eleanor exchanged a knowing look. She was clumsy, she was nervous, she was not a threat, she was perfect. After Chloe had been shown out, the verdict from Eleanor was immediate and decisive. "We are hiring her," she declared, as if there were no other possible outcome. "She is respectable, humble, and she knows her place. She is exactly what this family needs." Richard readily agreed. "She's got a great warmth about her, and she's clearly very professional." "What do you think, Amelia?" All eyes turned to her. She held their gaze for a long moment, letting the silence hang in the air. She projected the image of a mother reluctantly ceding control. "Her references are good," she said slowly, and Leo seemed comfortable with her for the few minutes they met. I suppose it would be all right." The look of smug satisfaction on Eleanor's face was almost unbearable. She believed she had won. She had maneuvered her pawn into the heart of her daughter-in-law's territory, and Amelia had been too weak and overwhelmed to stop her. That night, as Amelia lay in bed, her phone vibrated silently on the nightstand. It was a new message from an encrypted, unknown number. She opened it. There was no greeting and no signature, only a single image. A black and white photograph of a beautifully carved wooden chess piece. It was a knight. The Trojan horse was inside the city walls. The game had truly begun. On a phone call across town, Eleanor's voice was crisp with victory as she spoke to her son. "You see, Richard? It was easy. Amelia is so wrapped up in her little project, she can't see what's right in front of her. Chloe will get us everything we need. This is the beginning of the end for her." The moment Chloe Sullivan moved into the guest house, the atmosphere within the Crawford mansion shifted. On the surface, it became lighter. The presence of a calm, capable young woman dedicated to Leo's care seemed to be the exact solution the family needed. Clara, in her role as Chloe, was a paragon of nanny perfection. She did not just watch Leo, she engaged with him. She built elaborate forts from blankets and chairs, organized scavenger hunts in the sprawling backyard, and read stories with such theatrical flair that Leo would be captivated for hours. She was patient, kind, and unfailingly cheerful. Leo, who had been a quiet and somewhat anxious child, began to blossom under her attention. This, Clara knew, was the most crucial part of her infiltration. By genuinely winning Leo's affection, she made herself indispensable, creating a shield of legitimacy that Eleanor and Richard would never think to question. Her second objective was to win the trust of her true targets. With Eleanor, Clara employed a strategy of calculated deference. She treated the matriarch as a source of endless wisdom. "Mrs. Crawford, I'm trying a new recipe for Leo's lunch, but I know you're such a wonderful cook. Do you think a pinch of thyme is too much?" Or "Mrs. Crawford, your sense of style is incredible. I was wondering if you thought this particular park was suitable for a boy of Leo's standing." These questions, always asked with wide-eyed sincerity, fed Eleanor's colossal ego. The matriarch began to see Chloe not just as an employee, but as a disciple, a simple but loyal girl who understood the natural hierarchy of the world. With Richard, the approach was different. Around him, Chloe was slightly flustered, endearingly clumsy. She would laugh a little too brightly at his mediocre jokes and blush when he paid her a compliment. She made him feel witty, powerful, and dangerously charming, a feeling he clearly craved. Within 2 weeks, they both believed they had her completely under their thumb. They saw a tool, perfectly calibrated and ready to be used. The instructions began subtly. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Eleanor found Chloe in the kitchen organizing the pantry. "Chloe, dear," she said, her voice casual, "I just received an email from Leo's school. There's a parent-teacher conference this Friday. Don't mention it to Amelia." Chloe turned, her brow furrowed in mock confusion. "Oh, but shouldn't she know? It sounds important." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Of course it's important. That's precisely the point. She is so consumed by this new project of hers. This will be a little test, you see. A test of her priorities. We'll just see if a mother's instinct is stronger than a deadline." Chloe hesitated for a perfect 2-second beat. "If you think that's what's best, Mrs. Crawford." As Eleanor swept out of the room, satisfied, she was completely unaware that her entire monologue, delivered in her crisp, authoritative tone, had been recorded with perfect clarity by the silver pen sitting in a jar next to the stove, a high-fidelity digital recorder that was always on. The tasks began to escalate. A week later, Amelia had a crucial video conference with her clients from Project Athena. Eleanor, who knew the schedule perfectly, approached Chloe an hour beforehand with a new mission. "Leo adores playing in the garden after it rains," she said, a sly smile playing on her lips. "The ground is wonderfully muddy. I think he should have some creative playtime. And be sure to take a few pictures on your phone, dear. Happy memories are so important to capture." 30 minutes before Amelia's call, Chloe walked a gleeful, mud-caked Leo into the pristine white living room where Amelia was setting up her laptop. The timing was impeccable. The evidence was captured not only by Chloe's phone for Eleanor's benefit, but by a tiny, motion-activated camera hidden inside a coffee table book, documenting the entire staged interruption for Amelia's legal team. While Eleanor was the strategist, Richard played his own sordid part in the campaign. His betrayal was less about cunning and more about crude opportunism. He began with compliments on Chloe's appearance, which soon morphed into lingering touches on her arm or shoulder as he passed her in the hallway. The main offensive came late one night when Amelia was away at an overnight site visit. Richard found Chloe in the kitchen, tidying up after putting Leo to bed. He poured 2 glasses of expensive scotch. "A little reward for the best nanny in the world," he said, his voice low. He cornered her between the counter and the island, standing uncomfortably close. "You know, Chloe," he murmured, his eyes roaming over her, "you're a real breath of fresh air in this house. Amelia, she's just not present anymore. Her mind is always somewhere else." He placed a hand on the small of her back. "It's nice to have someone here who is actually warm." Chloe just looked down, feigning shyness and intimidation. She didn't need to say a word. The entire pathetic, predatory scene, including the clear reflection of his hand on her back in the polished chrome of the espresso machine, was being recorded by a camera disguised as a USB phone charger plugged into a nearby wall socket. A sophisticated system of information delivery was in place. Once a week, late at night, Clara would transfer the gigabytes of accumulated data audio files, video clips, time-stamped photos, and detailed written logs onto a micro SD card. She would then walk to the mansion's rarely used library and slip the card into a small slit she had expertly cut in the spine of a dusty copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. The next morning, Amelia would go to the library to find a book, retrieve the card, and spend her lunch hour in her locked office, bearing witness to the methodical destruction of her life. The psychological toll on Amelia was immense. She had to sit through dinner and listen to Richard express his disappointment that she had missed the parent-teacher conference she was never told about. She had to log into her important video call, flustered and apologizing for the muddy chaos, and see the flicker of smug satisfaction in her husband's eyes. She had to watch him interact with Chloe, knowing the predatory thoughts that were swirling behind his charming facade. Each piece of evidence Clara delivered was both a vindication and a fresh wound. It was the confirmation she needed, the steel that hardened her resolve. But it was also a brutal, intimate look at the depths of her husband's and mother-in-law's depravity. She was an actor in a play where she was the only one who had read the entire script. She knew the ending would be just, But she was forced to live through every painful, treacherous scene to get there. Her silence, her shield, and her patience, her sharpest, most deadly weapon. The web of lies was growing more complex by the day, but its architects had no idea they were the ones who were truly trapped. With their Trojan horse successfully installed within the gates, Eleanor and Richard began the second phase of their war, the systematic and merciless dismantling of Amelia's sanity. Their weapon of choice was gaslighting, and they wielded it with the precision of seasoned torturers. Armed with the incidents they instructed Chloe to create and report, they launched a relentless campaign designed to make Amelia question her own mind, to isolate her in a fog of self-doubt until she surrendered completely. The cruelty was intimate, constant, and executed with a chilling domesticity. It began with an attack on her memory. Small, insignificant things at first. Her car keys, which she always left in a ceramic bowl by the door, would vanish, only to be discovered by a helpful Chloe in the pocket of a coat Amelia hadn't worn in weeks. "Oh, Mrs. Crawford, you must have been so rushed this morning," Chloe would say, her face a mask of innocent concern. Richard would then sigh, the sound heavy with manufactured worry. "This keeps happening, Amelia. Are you sleeping enough? I'm getting concerned." A week later, a crucial file for Project Athena, which Amelia had left on her desk, disappeared. The ensuing panic sent her into a frantic search, delaying her for a critical client meeting. It was Eleanor who eventually located it, neatly tucked away on a bookshelf in the library. "Here it is, dear," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "You were probably just tidying up and forgot. Your mind is so full these days, it's completely understandable that things get misplaced." Each incident was a carefully orchestrated piece of theater. Amelia, armed with the knowledge of their plot from Clara's reports, had to play her part. She had to act frantic when her keys were gone. She had to look confused and distressed when the file reappeared in a place she never would have put it. Every performance was an agonizing exercise in self-control. To the outside world, and more importantly, to her enemies, she was a woman beginning to fray at the edges, her once sharp mind dulled by stress and exhaustion. They were methodically building their case, brick by insidious brick, that she was becoming incompetent, forgetful, and unstable. The digital recorder disguised as an air freshener in the hallway captured Eleanor's quiet instruction to Chloe. "Put it on the third shelf, behind the poetry books. She'll never think to look there. It will make her feel completely mad." From memory, they moved on to her emotional state. Her valid reactions were twisted and presented back to her as evidence of her instability. One evening, after Eleanor made a particularly cutting remark about Amelia's parenting, Amelia responded with sharp, justified anger. "That was an unfair thing to say, Eleanor." Instead of an apology, Eleanor simply widened her eyes and looked at Richard with alarm. "You see, Richard? The anger. It comes from nowhere. She's so on edge, so volatile. This isn't the woman you married." Richard immediately stepped in, taking Amelia by the shoulders, his voice low and condescending, as if speaking to a frightened animal. Hey, calm down, honey. Mother didn't mean it like that. You're overreacting. Why are you so sensitive lately?" They had trapped her. If she didn't react, she was cold and distant. If she did react, she was hysterical and unstable. Every path led to the conclusion they wanted to draw. They used Chloe as their supposed objective observer. "I hope you don't mind me saying, Mr. Crawford," Clara would later report to him, playing her part flawlessly, but Mrs. Crawford seemed very agitated all day. She was pacing a lot. The information, laundered through the seemingly neutral Nanny, solidified their narrative. They began suggesting she seek professional help, to talk to a therapist about her anxiety and stress. The suggestion was not born of concern. It was a strategic move to get a medical diagnosis on record that they could later use against her in a custody battle. The pain of their words was real. To be called crazy by the man you had loved, to have your reality systematically denied day after day, was a unique form of torture. There were moments, late at night, when the lines began to blur, when their relentless whispers echoed in the silence and a terrifying flicker of doubt would enter her mind. Am I overreacting? Am I losing my grip? The gaslighting was so pervasive, it was like carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless poison she was forced to breathe every single day. Her anchor, her tether to the truth, was the weekly drop from Clara. In the sanctuary of her locked office, Amelia would slide the micro SD card into her laptop. The screen would light up with the raw, unfiltered evidence of their conspiracy. She would watch the video of Chloe, on Eleanor's orders, carefully moving her keys from the bowl to her coat pocket. She would listen to the audio of Richard and Eleanor in the study, discussing her erratic behavior and how it was all going according to plan. She would see a photo of a page from Eleanor's daily planner with a note that read, 3 p.m., Chloe to delete A's meeting with architects. Tell R, she forgot. This evidence was more than just legal ammunition. It was a lifeline. It was the irrefutable proof that she was not going mad. The world had gone mad around her, but her own mind was sound. Each clip, each recording, was a dose of antidote to their poison. It washed away the doubt and replaced it with a cold, clarifying rage. It reminded her of what she was fighting for: her son, her company, her name, and her own sanity. She would watch these monstrous little plays, her expression hardening, her resolve solidifying from a liquid hope into unbreakable steel. She was not the person they were trying to create. She was not fragile, forgetful, or hysterical. She was a woman made of iron, being forged in the very fire they had set to destroy her. And with every cruel word, with every manipulative trick, they were only making their own eventual reckoning more certain and more severe. They thought they were breaking her, but they were merely sharpening the blade that would one day be at their throats. With Amelia now thoroughly cast in the role of the unraveling wife, Eleanor and Richard grew bolder, their arrogance blinding them to the silent observer in their midst. Their conversations became less guarded, their actions more brazen. They believed their victory was a foregone conclusion. It was this hubris that gave Clara the opening she was waiting for. She had documented the psychological abuse and Richard's pathetic advances, but her instincts, honed by years of uncovering the dark underbellies of powerful families, told her there was more. The sheer scale of their campaign felt disproportionate to just winning a custody battle. The venom felt deeper, the planning more intricate. It felt, she thought, like a corporate takeover, and she decided it was time to follow the money. The opportunity arrived on a silver platter. Eleanor announced she was taking Richard and Leo for a long weekend to the family's coastal estate in the Hamptons. It was a boys' trip, she cooed, a chance for Leo to spend quality time with his father and grandmother while poor Amelia tries to catch up on her rest. She gave Chloe the weekend off, a reward for her loyal service. Just look after the house, dear. We trust you completely. It was the gravest mistake she would ever make. The moment their car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, the Crawford mansion ceased to be a home and became Clara's operational theater. Chloe Sullivan, the sweet, simple nanny, vanished. Clara Vance, the elite operative from the Argent Group, went to work. Her target was Richard's home office, his private sanctuary, the one room in the house where he believed his secrets were safe. The door was locked, but a lock meant for domestic privacy was no match for the slender set of pics Clara retrieved from a hidden compartment in her boot. Inside, the room smelled of leather and self-importance. Clara moved with silent, economic grace. Her first task was the computer. Richard was careless, using a simple password related to his college fraternity, a detail she had gleaned weeks ago while helping him with a printer jam. Once inside, she didn't waste time searching. She pulled a small, sleek device from her bag, a high-speed solid-state drive cloner, and attached it to the desktop's main drive. While the machine worked, silently duplicating every single byte of data, she turned her attention to the room itself. She photographed documents left on the desk, letters from a law firm in the Cayman Islands, brokerage account statements, and a folder ominously labeled Asset Restructuring. In a locked drawer of his mahogany desk, which she opened with the same swift expertise as the door, she found the real prize, a ledger. It was filled with handwritten notes, dates, and figures, a meticulously kept record of a shadow business. The entries detailed large payments from Amelia's firm, Hayes Design Group, to a series of unknown vendor names, Apex Global Consulting, Keystone Material Sourcing, ER Holdings. Clara's heart beat a little faster. These were not legitimate business expenses. This was a paper trail. By the time the drive cloner beeped softly, signaling its completion, Clara had a comprehensive picture of a massive fraud in progress. Back in the guest house, which she had swept for bugs upon her arrival, Clara began her analysis on a secure, encrypted laptop. The cloned hard drive revealed a world of staggering greed and treachery. Buried in a password-protected partition, she found the corporate documents for the shell companies from the ledger. Apex Global, Keystone, all of them were registered in offshore tax havens, their ownership hidden behind layers of corporate veils. But Clara was an expert at peeling back those layers. She found the incorporation papers, the digital signatures, the ultimate beneficiary statements. And at the bottom of the rabbit hole, she found the true architect of the scheme, Eleanor Crawford. Richard was the instrument, but Eleanor was the composer of this symphony of theft. The plan was as brilliant as it was evil. For the past 2 years, Richard, in his role as the firm's de facto CFO, a position Amelia had given him out of love and trust, had been approving massively inflated invoices from these shell companies for services never rendered and materials never delivered. He was systematically draining millions of dollars from the company Amelia had bled for and funneling it into offshore accounts that Eleanor controlled. The gaslighting campaign now made perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't the prelude to a custody battle, it was the anesthetic. They were trying to drive Amelia mad, to discredit her completely, so that when her company finally collapsed under the weight of the theft, her accusations of fraud would be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a broken, hysterical woman. They weren't just planning to leave her, they were planning to erase her, to leave her with nothing, no son, no money, and no reputation. It was a plan for her utter and complete annihilation. This information was too sensitive for the usual dead drop. Clara arranged a brief, in-person meeting. She sent a coded text to Amelia, and they met the next day at a crowded farmer's market in a town 30 miles away. Amid the bustle of shoppers and vendors, the two women looked like strangers. As they passed each other at a stall selling apples, Clara slipped a small, heavy, encrypted hard drive into Amelia's shopping bag. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. No words were exchanged. None were needed. That night, in her office, Amelia plugged the drive into her computer. The password was Cassandra, the Trojan priestess cursed to see the future but never be believed. The files loaded, and Amelia's world fractured in a way it never had before. This was not the emotional pain of a cheating husband or a cruel mother-in-law. This was a violation of her soul. She saw the spreadsheets, the wire transfers in 6 and 7 figures. She saw her own signature, expertly forged on documents authorizing payments to phantom companies. She saw the name of her company, Hayes Design Group, the entity she had birthed from nothing, the testament to her talent and her relentless work being used as a private piggy bank to fund the lifestyle of the people plotting her ruin. The breath left her body. This cold, calculated theft of her life's work felt infinitely more personal than Richard's pathetic attempts to flirt with the nanny. He hadn't just betrayed their marriage vows. He had desecrated her legacy. He had taken her trust, the greatest gift she had ever given him, and used it to systematically gut her. The fight was no longer about a broken heart or a broken home. The battlefield had expanded. This was not a domestic dispute. It was grand larceny. It was wire fraud. It was a federal crime. A cold, crystalline certainty settled over her. The goal was no longer simply to survive. It was no longer to escape with her son. The goal was to seek justice. Richard and Eleanor were not just cruel, entitled people. They were criminals. And Amelia would see them in a courtroom, not for a divorce hearing, but for a sentencing. The final piece of evidence, the hard drive detailing the breathtaking scope of the financial fraud, was not just a smoking gun, it was a nuclear bomb. With it, the collection phase of Amelia's war was over. The time for silent observation had passed. The time for a final, decisive strike had arrived. In a secure conference room at the Argent Group's headquarters, a secret war council was convened. It consisted of Amelia, the commander-in-chief, Clara, her field general, and Miss Sterling, her seasoned strategist. Spread across the glass table was the sum of Richard and Eleanor's sins, audio files crackling with malice, video clips dripping with betrayal, and a labyrinthine map of financial documents that proved a conspiracy of epic greed. "The case is airtight," Miss Sterling stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "You have grounds for a highly favorable divorce settlement, a civil suit for damages that will bankrupt them, and enough evidence to interest the district attorney's office in multiple felony charges. The question is no longer one of proof, it is one of strategy. How and when do you wish to deploy this?" Clara looked at Amelia, deferring to her client. Amelia stared at the timeline of evidence, her expression calm and unreadable. A conventional legal battle, fought over months or years in sterile courtrooms, felt insufficient. It would be a quiet, private victory. What Richard and Eleanor had done was not quiet or private. Their campaign against her had been an assault on her identity, her reputation, and her very reality. The justice, she decided, must be as public and as personal as the crime. "They are planning a party," Amelia said, her voice quiet but firm. "Our 10th wedding anniversary, at the house. 200 guests are invited. They're friends, they're business partners, the pillars of their community. They intend to stand up in front of all those people and give speeches about our perfect marriage, our perfect family." She paused, letting the bitter irony hang in the air. They built their reputation on a facade of family values and integrity. "I want to be the one who tears it down, brick by brick, in front of everyone they have ever tried to impress. We will use their party as our stage." A slow smile spread across Miss Sterling's face. "Theatrical," she mused, "but effective. A public detonation ensures there is no room for spin. No chance for them to paint you as a bitter, scorned wife later on. You discredit them and their narrative in one fell swoop." The plan, codenamed Anniversary, went into motion. Amelia, guided by the Argent Group, assembled her army. She retained not a simple divorce attorney, but Jessica Thorne, a famously aggressive former federal prosecutor who had built a private practice specializing in complex financial fraud. During their first meeting, Amelia laid out the evidence. Thorne, a woman not easily impressed, listened with growing intensity, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Mrs. Crawford," she said when Amelia was done, "this isn't a divorce case with a financial component. This is a RICO case with a marriage attached. I'm going to enjoy this." While Thorne's team prepared a mountain of legal paperwork, divorce petitions, civil complaints citing fraud and racketeering, and a comprehensive report for the DA, Clara took on the role of producer for their main event. The centerpiece of the evening would be a video. Richard and Eleanor had already hired a videographer to create a schmaltzy tribute slideshow of their 10 years together, set to play after the dinner speeches. Clara's mission was to create a replacement. She spent days in an editing suite, weaving together the evidence into a devastating 5-minute narrative of deceit. The final cut was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It opened with the idyllic family photos Richard and Eleanor had supplied to the original videographer, set to soft classical music. Then, the music would scratch to a halt. The screen would cut to black, and Eleanor's voice, crisp and clear from the pen recorder, would fill the silent ballroom, prove she is an unfit mother. "It's the only way you will gain full control of the assets and the boy." The film would then unfold, intercutting the smiling family photos with the ugly truth. The grainy footage of Richard cornering Chloe in the kitchen, the audio of Eleanor instructing her to stage the mud incident, and for the finale, a simple, clean animation showing the flow of money, from Hayes Design Group's accounts, through the shell corporations, and into an offshore account statement bearing Eleanor Crawford's name. The video was clinical, brutal, and undeniable. Watching the final cut with Clara, Amelia felt a cold, grim satisfaction. This was not just revenge, it was truth. The logistics of the ambush were planned with military precision. The Argent Group's technical division would handle the infiltration. 2 of their best operatives, posing as extra waiters from the catering company, would arrive early. Their job was to access the A/V control room, disable the existing media player, and patch in their own secure laptop, which contained the single, 5-minute video file. They would be in constant, discreet communication with Clara, who would be at the party in her guise as Chloe, the loyal nanny. In the week leading up to the party, Amelia lived a surreal double life. By day, she was the dutiful wife, finalizing the guest list with Richard, tasting cake samples, and enduring Eleanor's endless pronouncements on proper party etiquette. She played her part with an Oscar-worthy performance, appearing slightly broken but trying to be cheerful, a woman clinging to the fiction of her happy marriage. But by night, she was a general on the eve of battle, participating in encrypted conference calls with Thorne's legal team, reviewing the exact phrasing of the legal documents, and mapping out the ballroom floor to plan the lawyers' positions. Thorne's team, 3 sharp-suited attorneys, would also be in attendance, posing as Amelia's colleagues from the firm. They had their instructions to remain inconspicuous until the video ended, at which point they would converge on Richard and Eleanor and serve them the papers in the stunned silence of the crowd. On the afternoon of the party, a strange calm descended upon Amelia. As she sat at her vanity, having her hair and makeup done, she looked at her own reflection. The haunted, uncertain woman of a few months ago was gone. In her place was a woman who understood the full, terrible weight of what was to come and who did not flinch from it. She was no longer just a victim of their plot. She had become its author. The house below was already beginning to fill with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. The guests were arriving. The orchestra was tuning up. The stage was set. And as she put on the diamond earrings Richard had given her for their first anniversary, she felt no sentimentality, only a cold, hard sense of purpose. They were a perfect symbol for the evening, a beautiful, glittering lie that was about to be shattered into 1,000 pieces. The grand ballroom of the Crawford mansion was a glittering tableau of wealth and influence. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful undercurrent to the murmur of 200 conversations. Waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. Richard was in his element, holding court near the fireplace, his laughter booming, his arm possessively around Amelia's waist. Eleanor glided through the room like a queen reviewing her subjects, bestowing a nod here, a thin smile there, soaking in the envy and admiration that she considered her birthright. To anyone watching, they were the absolute pinnacle of success, a family forged of power and grace. Amelia played her part with the serene composure of a seasoned actress. She smiled. She thanked guests for their well wishes. She allowed Richard to pull her close for a toast. But beneath the placid surface, her senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a countdown. After the main course had been cleared, Richard tapped a knife against his champagne glass, calling for silence. He gave a brief, charming speech, thanking everyone for coming and raising a glass to his beautiful, talented, and endlessly patient wife, Amelia. The crowd applauded warmly. Then, he handed the microphone to his mother. And now, the woman who taught me everything I know about family and loyalty, my mother, Eleanor Crawford. Eleanor took the stage, beaming under the warm glow of the spotlights. This was her moment. She began by recounting tales of Richard's childhood, then moved on to the day he brought Amelia home. "I will admit," she said, her voice laced with false humility, "I was a protective mother. But Amelia, with her quiet strength and her unwavering devotion to my son, quickly won us all over." She looked directly at Amelia, her eyes glittering with what the guests saw as affection, but Amelia knew was triumph. They have built a beautiful life, a testament to the fact that a strong marriage is a fortress. It is built on a foundation of trust, loyalty, and the willingness to make sacrifices for the greater good of the family. I am so proud of them both. As Eleanor spoke her hypocritical sermon, Amelia's gaze swept the room. She saw Clara, standing near the rear exit, give Leo a small cookie. It was the signal. In a few moments, she would discreetly lead him upstairs to his room, far away from the coming carnage. Amelia's eyes then found one of the young waiters standing near the A divided by V control booth. He met her gaze for a split second and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The system was theirs. Finally, she saw Jessica Thorne, her lawyer, nursing a glass of water near the stage. perfectly positioned. All the pieces were in place. Eleanor finished her speech to a wave of enthusiastic applause. "And now," she announced, her voice swelling with pride, "Richard and I have prepared a little look back at their 10 wonderful years together." She turned with a flourish toward the massive projection screen that had been erected behind the stage. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The crowd murmured in anticipation. The video began exactly as expected. A soft, romantic piano score played over a photo of Richard and Amelia on their wedding day, smiling and radiant. Another photo followed, of them on their honeymoon. Then one of them bringing a newborn Leo home from the hospital. The guests let out a collective, sentimental awe. Eleanor stood on the stage, her back to the audience, watching the screen with a smug, self-satisfied smile. Then it happened. The image of a smiling Leo on a tricycle froze. The piano music scratched to an abrupt, jarring halt. The screen went black. A confused whisper rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's smile faltered. She glanced, annoyed, toward the control booth. And in the dead, expectant silence, a single, crystal-clear voice filled the ballroom. It was her own. "Prove she is an unfit mother. It's the only way you will gain full control of the assets, and, more importantly, the boy, when you file for divorce." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Eleanor froze, her face a mask of disbelief. She spun around to face the crowd, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Richard, who had been laughing with a guest, went rigid, his face draining of all color. On the screen, the smiling family photos returned, but now they were intercut with the ugly truth. The grainy footage of Richard in the kitchen, his hand on Chloe's back. "Amelia, she's just not present anymore," his voice slurred from the speakers. The audio of Eleanor instructing Chloe to stage the mud incident played over a picture of her lovingly cradling Leo as a baby. The room erupted. Whispers turned to shocked exclamations. The soft glow of guests' faces was replaced by the harsh blue light of dozens of cell phones, all raised, all recording the public execution of the Crawford family name. Richard made a desperate lunge for the stage, perhaps to unplug something, to make it stop. But a large man, an Argent operative, posing as a guest, stepped into his path, placing a firm hand on his chest. "I'd stay right where you are, sir." The video reached its devastating finale. The simple, elegant animation of the money trail, from Hayes Design Group to the shell corporations, to the final offshore account. An image of Eleanor's forged signature on a transfer authorization filled the screen, large and undeniable. The video ended. The screen held on that final, damning image. And the ballroom was plunged into a silence so profound, so absolute, it felt like the end of the world. Into that void, Amelia moved. She walked calmly onto the stage, her heels clicking with resolute purpose on the polished floor. She took the microphone from Eleanor's limp, trembling hand. The matriarch stumbled back, looking at Amelia with the eyes of a cornered animal. Amelia did not look at her. She did not look at Richard. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, or angry, or tearful. It was cold, clear, and final. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice ringing through the silent hall. "And thank you, Eleanor, for that moving speech about loyalty and trust. It seems my only unwavering devotion was to uncovering the truth." She paused, letting the words land. "To those of you here who are business partners of the Crawford family, I advise you to call your auditors in the morning. To everyone else, I apologize for cutting the celebration short." She then turned for the first time and looked at the two shattered people on the stage with her. "Richard, this is for you." On cue, Jessica Thorne and her two associates stepped forward. They moved with the brisk, emotionless efficiency of reapers. "Richard Crawford, Eleanor Crawford," Thorne announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "You are being served." She handed a thick, heavy envelope to Richard. His hands shook so badly he could barely take it. She handed another to the catatonic Eleanor. "That is a petition for divorce on the grounds of conspiracy and fraud, a civil suit for the recovery of $18 million in stolen assets, and a copy of the formal criminal complaint that was filed with the district attorney's office this afternoon. The flash of 100 cell phone cameras went off at once, illuminating the scene of utter devastation. A family, a reputation, and an empire, all turned to dust in the space of 5 minutes. Tôi đã viết chi tiết phần 2, chính trong phản hồi ngay trước đây. Có vẻ như bạn đã gửi lại yêu cầu tương tự. Dưới đây là nội dung cho phần 2.90 mà tôi đã hoàn thành. Vui lòng xem lại và cho tôi biết nếu bạn muốn tôi sửa đổi hoặc tiếp tục với phần tiếp theo. Phần 2.90, đêm phán quyết, The Reckoning. The grand ballroom of the Crawford mansion was a glittering tableau of wealth and influence. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music a tasteful undercurrent to the murmur of 200 conversations. Waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. Richard was in his element, holding court near the fireplace, his laughter booming, his arm possessively around Amelia's waist. Eleanor glided through the room like a queen reviewing her subjects, bestowing a nod here, a thin smile there, soaking in the envy and admiration that she considered her birthright. To anyone watching, they were the absolute pinnacle of success, a family forged of power and grace. Amelia played her part with the serene composure of a seasoned actress. She smiled. She thanked guests for their well wishes. She allowed Richard to pull her close for a toast. But beneath the placid surface, her senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a countdown. After the main course had been cleared, Richard tapped a knife against his champagne glass, calling for silence. He gave a brief, charming speech, thanking everyone for coming and raising a glass to his beautiful, talented, and endlessly patient wife, Amelia. The crowd applauded warmly. Then, he handed the microphone to his mother. And now, the woman who taught me everything I know about family and loyalty. My mother, Eleanor Crawford. Eleanor took the stage, beaming under the warm glow of the spotlights. This was her moment. She began by recounting tales of Richard's childhood, then moved on to the day he brought Amelia home. I will admit, she said, her voice laced with false humility, I was a protective mother. But Amelia, with her quiet strength and her unwavering devotion to my son, quickly won us all over. She looked directly at Amelia, her eyes glittering with what the guests saw as affection, but Amelia knew was triumph. They have built a beautiful life, a testament to the fact that a strong marriage is a fortress. It is built on a foundation of trust, loyalty, and the willingness to make sacrifices for the greater good of the family. I am so proud of them both. As Eleanor spoke her hypocritical sermon, Amelia's gaze swept the room. She saw Clara, standing near the rear exit, give Leo a small cookie. It was the signal. In a few moments, she would discreetly lead him upstairs to his room, far away from the coming carnage. Amelia's eyes then found one of the young waiters, standing near the A divided by V control booth. He met her gaze for a split second and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The system was theirs. Finally, she saw Jessica Thorne, her lawyer, nursing a glass of water near the stage, perfectly positioned. All the pieces were in place. Eleanor finished her speech to a wave of enthusiastic applause. And now, she announced, her voice swelling with pride, Richard and I have prepared a little look back at their 10 wonderful years together. She turned with a flourish toward the massive projection screen that had been erected behind the stage. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The crowd murmured in anticipation. The video began exactly as expected. A soft, romantic piano score played over a photo of Richard and Amelia on their wedding day, smiling and radiant. Another photo followed, of them on their honeymoon. Then one of them bringing a newborn Leo home from the hospital. The guests let out a collective, sentimental awe. Eleanor stood on the stage, her back to the audience, watching the screen with a smug, self-satisfied smile. Then, it happened. The image of a smiling Leo on a tricycle froze. The piano music scratched to an abrupt, jarring halt. The screen went black. A confused whisper rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's smile faltered. She glanced, annoyed, toward the control booth. And in the dead, expectant silence, a single, crystal-clear voice filled the ballroom. It was her own. Prove she is an unfit mother. It's the only way you will gain full control of the assets and, more importantly, the boy, when you file for divorce. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Eleanor froze, her face a mask of disbelief. She spun around to face the crowd, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Richard, who had been laughing with a guest, went rigid, his face draining of all color. On the screen, the smiling family photos returned, but now they were intercut with the ugly truth. The grainy footage of Richard in the kitchen, his hand on Chloe's back. Amelia. She's just not present anymore. His voice slurred from the speakers. The audio of Eleanor instructing Chloe to stage the mud incident played over a picture of her lovingly cradling Leo as a baby. The room erupted. Whispers turned to shocked exclamations. The soft glow of guests' faces was replaced by the harsh blue light of dozens of cell phones, all raised, all recording the public execution of the Crawford family name. Richard made a desperate lunge for the stage, perhaps to unplug something, to make it stop, but a large man, an argent operative posing as a guest, stepped into his path, placing a firm hand on his chest. "I'd stay right where you are, sir." The video reached its devastating finale. The simple, elegant animation of the money trail, from Hayes Design Group's accounts, through the shell corporations, and into the final offshore account. An image of Eleanor's forged signature on a transfer authorization filled the screen, large and undeniable. The video ended. The screen held on that final, damning image. And the ballroom was plunged into a silence so profound, so absolute, it felt like the end of the world. Into that void, Amelia moved. She walked calmly onto the stage, her heels clicking with resolute purpose on the polished floor. She took the microphone from Eleanor's limp, trembling hand. The matriarch stumbled back, looking at Amelia with the eyes of a cornered animal. Amelia did not look at her. She did not look at Richard. She looked out at the sea of stunned faces. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, or angry, or tearful. It was cold, clear, and final. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice ringing through the silent hall. "And thank you, Eleanor, for that moving speech about loyalty and trust. It seems my only unwavering devotion was to uncovering the truth." She paused, letting the words land. "To those of you here who are business partners of the Crawford family, I advise you to call your auditors in the morning. To everyone else, I apologize for cutting the celebration short." She then turned, for the first time, and looked at the two shattered people on the stage with her. "Richard, this is for you." On cue, Jessica Thorne and her two associates stepped forward. They moved with the brisk, emotionless efficiency of reapers. "Richard Crawford, Eleanor Crawford," Thorne announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. "You are being served." She handed a thick, heavy envelope to Richard. His hands shook so badly he could barely take it. She handed another to the catatonic Eleanor. "That is a petition for divorce on the grounds of conspiracy and fraud, a civil suit for the recovery of $18 million in stolen assets, and a copy of the formal criminal complaint that was filed with the district attorney's office this afternoon." The flash of 100 cell phone cameras went off at once, illuminating the scene of utter devastation. A family, a reputation, and an empire, all turned to dust in the space of 5 minutes. Phần 3, Kết Chuyện. 6 months after the anniversary party that sent an earthquake through Greenwich society, the world was a different place. The name Crawford, once a bastion of old money and respectability, was now a permanent fixture in the tabloids and financial news, a synonym for scandal and spectacular downfall. Richard, having lost everything, accepted a plea deal for his role in the fraud and was serving a minimum security prison sentence. Eleanor, the true architect, refused any such deal. Her pride, even in the face of irrefutable evidence, was absolute. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering, and the last image the world saw of her was a stony, unrepentant face as she was led from the courthouse in handcuffs. Their assets were seized, their friends vanished, and their fortress of lies was reduced to a pile of legal ash. Amelia, however, was not there to see any of it. She had no interest in the spectacle of their demise. Her justice had been served that night in the ballroom. The rest was just paperwork. She sold the Greenwich mansion, a place that held nothing but the ghosts of a life that was never real, and moved, with Leo, into a sun-drenched penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. The space was modern, open, and filled with light, a physical manifestation of her new life. Her company, now purged of its secret parasites and infused with the capital recovered in the civil suit, was thriving beyond her wildest dreams. She was not just surviving, she was victorious, reborn from the ashes of a life she had been forced to burn down. Her days were filled with the happy chaos of a 5-year-old boy, the creative challenges of her work, and a profound, quiet sense of peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, a small, discreetly packaged box arrived by courier. It bore the minimalist logo of the Argent Group. Amelia paused, a flicker of the old tension returning for a moment. She thought that chapter was closed. Inside the box, there was no tech, no surveillance gear, only a slim file folder and a single typewritten letter from Clara Vance. "Amelia," the letter began, "I hope this finds you and Leo well. The asset recovery process was extensive, requiring us to perform a deep forensic audit on Eleanor Crawford's entire financial history. In doing so, we uncovered a pattern, a historical precedent for her actions against you. We debated whether to share this information, as your case is legally closed. But Miss Sterling and I agreed that you deserved the complete truth, the final piece of the puzzle. What you do with this information is, of course, entirely your decision." Her curiosity piqued. Amelia opened the file. It contained documents that were decades old, bank statements from the year before Richard's father, Arthur Crawford, had died, a copy of a draft divorce petition drawn up by Arthur's lawyer, a coroner's report listing the official cause of death as a massive coronary thrombosis, a heart attack, and finally, wire transfer confirmations dated the day after Arthur's funeral, showing a significant portion of his personal fortune being moved into a trust that was solely controlled by Eleanor. Amelia spread the documents across her table, and the final, darkest secret of the House of Crawford revealed itself. The pattern was identical. Arthur Crawford, a shrewd businessman in his own right, had discovered that his wife was embezzling money from his company. The draft petition cited financial malfeasance as a primary reason for seeking a divorce. He was preparing to expose her, to cut her off. But before he could file the papers, he suffered a sudden, fatal heart attack. He was a man with no prior history of heart disease. The investigation was cursory. He was a wealthy man in a high-stress world. Such tragedies happened. Eleanor, the grieving widow, inherited everything. A cold, horrifying clarity washed over Amelia. Eleanor's war against her had never just been about greed. It was a pathological, terrified repetition of the past. In Amelia, a strong, intelligent, financially independent woman who was tied to the family business, Eleanor didn't just see a daughter-in-law she disliked. She saw the ghost of her husband. She saw the same threat, the same potential for discovery and ruin that she had faced 25 years earlier. The gaslighting, the attempts to declare her unstable, the financial destruction, it was all a frantic, desperate attempt to neutralize the threat before it could strike, to replay her old victory and secure her dark throne once more. Amelia walked to the vast floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the sprawling, vibrant city below. She felt no fear, no lingering anger, only a profound, chilling sense of an ending. She finally understood the full anatomy of the monster she had faced. She had fought what she thought was a battle for her life, when in reality, she had unknowingly stumbled into the final act of a tragedy that had begun long before she was born. She thought of the long months of silence, the nights spent forcing herself to act broken and weak, the incredible restraint it took to not scream the truth. And she realized the most powerful lesson she had learned. People are conditioned to fear the loud, the aggressive, the overtly threatening. They rarely fear the quiet one in the corner. But they should never, ever underestimate the silence of a person who has been forced to endure too much. For while they may appear to be suffering quietly, they are not idle. In that silence, they are not breaking. They are observing, they are learning, and they are planning. In that silence, they are building a case, forging a weapon, and waiting with the patience of a predator for the single, perfect moment to strike. The story of Amelia Crawford, for all its drama and pain, was over. But behind every family door, in every quiet mansion, and every suburban home, another story is always waiting to be told. Another truth is waiting to be unearthed. And we will be here to tell it until the next tragedy.